Welcome everybody to this month's edition of Talking Education, and today we're going to be talking behaviour, and we've got three really amazing people. We've got Patrick Ottley-O'Connor, who is an executive head teacher and has got incredible length of service and that he brings with him through his wisdom. And then we got Karl Pupé, and today we're actually wrapping the discussion around Karl's second book. He had a book launch 2 weeks ago, and this is technically part of that launch when he and I were talking about how we could be involved in his launch. And Karl's written 2 books around behaviour management, and the latest book is called Teachers of the Lost Class, and I'm sure he'll tell us a little bit more about that, or he'll share some of his thinking around behaviour management. And then we've got Tammy Nichols, who's the head of an alternative provision setting, and she is going to talk some. Obviously, we've got 3 people who are secondary, essentially, but okay, primary, because I'm here, and I will do my best to make sure that we've got primary voice too. We're going to be recording the beginning of the conversation between everyone, just between the panel. And then if anyone wants to be part of a longer discussion at the end, there is an opportunity to take part in that, and that will be a freestyle discussion. Okay, so Tammy, Karl, Patrick, huge thanks to you for giving up your evening and coming to share your wisdom. And I'm going to ask everybody to mute themselves, apart from Karl, who's going to talk about his vision and his values around behaviour management in our schools. Thank you, Karl.
Thank you. I just want to start off by saying thank you, and thank you to Alison, especially for organising this, and to use the words of that great philosopher known as Jay-Z. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with me, or you're here with us, should we say? You know, not watching one of the biggest games in African history, but there we go. Education first. Okay, so let's talk a bit about it. So I wrote a book, as Alison rightly said, called The Action Hero Teacher 2, which is a sequel to The Action Hero Teacher 1. And you might be asking yourself, saying, Karl, why did you write a book? Why did you go through that pain and horror and repetitive strain injury of writing? Trust me, a lot of typing does it to your wrists. I'm not a young buck anymore. I'm not a young man anymore. Although, you know, it's deceptive. I'm not a young man anymore. So before I talk about the second book, let's quickly talk about the first one. So the Action Hero Teacher 1, a classroom management was made simple, was written in or released in 2019, and it's all about behaviour management and classroom management. And my particular bent, I'm sure we'll discuss this, my history more as the conversation goes on, but I worked in alternative provision for a very long time. I was a NEETs coordinator. So a NEET stands for Not in Employment, Education or Training. And these young people were often kicked out of school, excluded from school. And if we did not intervene, they basically were 80 to 90% more likely to get involved in antisocial behavior. We're talking guns, we're talking drugs, we're talking trafficking, prostitution, all the horrible things that you see in the news. So we were the first and last line of defense. Wrote it in 2019 for, okay, my job's done. I'm not writing another book. It's so funny. You know, I have one child, and my wife would say, after this, she had the first child, she said, I'm never going to have another one ever again. I don't want to go through that pain ever again. And now she's like, we need to have the second. There you go. It's kind of like writing a book, I suppose. So, so why did I write the second book? It's because of everything that happened post 2019 with COVID. And I realized that we are in a very interesting time in human history. The same way we study 1939, 1945, 1963, 1969, I'm sure the historians in the house will know what all those dates meant. You know, pivotal world events. The same way we study these events is the same way that historians, hopefully 100, 200, 300 years from now, will be looking at the events that took place after 2019. I personally believe, and a lot of commentators believe, that 2019, with the COVID-19 pandemic, and the subsequent lockdowns, was the official death of the what we call the industrial age. All right. Now it was seen as the birth of the information age. I went onto a talk where they were talking about, I can't remember, it had Alistair Stewart on it. His daughter's a head teacher of a school, one of the heads of LinkedIn, one of the heads of these other tech companies, talking about technology. And they said, one of them said, I think it was the head of LinkedIn, or their CTO, Chief Technology Officer of LinkedIn, said, COVID has done for online learning or for technology what they've not managed to do for 20 years. They said there were so many applications that they went to schools with and said, you know, we want to put this application in, we want to put that application in, and the schools were almost like, you know, we're not interested. And when COVID hit and lockdowns hit, it goes, they were literally banging on the door. So the main reason why we were able to survive that period was because of Internet 2.0, social media, and the way how connectivity has allowed us to keep on operating as a society. Because I think at one point, 70% of the world was locked down. But why is that relevant for education? Another thing, so we've got, on one hand, we've got technology and what technology is doing to the world. On the other hand, we're seeing vast inequalities because of everything that's going on in the economy. Not to get political, but you know, inequalities rising. We've got the cost of living crisis. There's so many other factors. And what's happening when I speak to a lot of teachers, because now I'm a full-time educational consultant, is that they're saying that behavior's got worse in schools. Virtually all the teachers I speak to nowadays are saying, look, you know, the behavior's worse. We've got a teaching crisis as well, that 50% of teachers, no, sorry, let me get it right. 40% of teachers around the UK want to leave the profession within the next 5 years, but it goes up to 50% when we're talking about the city, the inner city schools, not to, again, those that are come from socioeconomic, they've got socioeconomic challenges, should I say, trying to say it in the right way. So what is happening? That's the reason why I wrote the Action Hero Teachers of the Lost Class, is because we have faced the biggest disruption, global disruption, since World War II. We've had a lot of young people who have struggled through the lockdowns and COVID. So some of the behavior that we're seeing is not just poor behavior, it's trauma. And unfortunately, our education system, which has got its roots in the Edwardian, it comes from the Edwardian time, I believe. So my time's up. That's my timer. So it comes from the Edwardian time, I believe. I time myself. I'm good like that. I'm going to land my plane. I'm going to land my point. It comes from the Edwardian time. It's not being disrupted. If we teach 21st century children in 18th century classrooms, if I took somebody from the Victorian or Edwardian time, a teacher from that time, and took him into a modern classroom, if you take away the whiteboard, you take away the speakers, he would understand exactly what context he's in. He probably could teach from that curriculum. So what I'm arguing is that we have to become more emotionally aware to deal with this trauma, because I believe we're on a ticking time bomb of trauma in that particular regard. I'll talk about that later. And also we've got to realize that these young people are the most empowered and technologically advanced young people in the history of mankind, for various reasons, which I haven't got time to go into. So everything's changed forever and we have to adapt. And I'm going to leave it there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Karl. Putting us into a year in our context. Wonderful. Thank you. And the next person I'm going to invite to share his vision and values is Patrick. Hi, Patrick. You need to unmute, Patrick.
Is that better? Thank you. Thank you. It's good to be here. Unlike Karl, I've not written a book or two. I've contributed to a few. So again, his Hannah's here. I might as well mention the Diverse Educators Manifesto. I was pleased to take part in that, and a few other books of that way. And it is something that maybe I'm considering in these years. I am in my twilight years now. I just want to tell you a little bit of a journey from my history in education and why behaviour is and the conversations that are very interesting to me. Not the Victorian times, but quite a long time ago, in the early 80s, I started my training, almost 40 years ago now. And it was a very different time. Behaviour in schools was different. Behaviour in society was different. And the way we managed things. In fact, although corporal punishment had been banned when I first started, in my first few years, routinely, staff would still strike children. Corporal punishment would still occur in the schools. In the early to mid 80s that I witnessed. Again, I witnessed that as a student myself. And then I saw the profession, because I'd grown up without using that. I saw many older teachers leave the profession and us change. And people at the time saying behaviour's never been as bad. So in the 90s, we had a lot of people saying in secondary, behaviour's never been as bad. And in fact, I became very good at behaviour. I became very good dealing with naughty boys. I followed riots around the country at different times. In Bradford, where I started my career, into Oldham, into Salford. And on the back of those things, the unrest and disadvantage the schools I've chosen to work in. But as a young PE teacher, found I was good with difficult people and went through a pastoral route in school. So behaviour management became my bread and butter. And again, it was different back then, but that really was the start of my my vision that now I'm going to talk about something a woman that I've worked with before, a woman called Suzanne Murray, calls a culture of care, and creating a culture of care within schools. And that's always been my approach. Now, I'll explain a little bit more about that shortly. It's not a soft option, and you have to make some pretty tough decisions to have a culture of care. But within my schools, I've always had firm structures, always had high expectations. And in fact, there are some phrases that are around at the moment, high expectations, no excuses, no exceptions, that can touch on a zero tolerance sort of approach. And again, as part of the programs like the Future Leaders programs and some of the charter school work, etc., I've been fortunate to visit and be involved in those processes as well. That can become quite toxic in schools. And my antidote has always been to having high expectations, no excuses, no exceptions, but wrap that around, as Karl said there, but be trauma-informed, the phrase that's now being used, but trauma-informed, looking at restorative practices that we work with people and helping the young people to manage their own behaviour or work to do so. But for me, the biggest challenge has always been the staff and making sure the staff come at it from the right angle as well. So quality CPD around the work we do. And I suppose in my 18 years of headship or executive headship until retiring full-time this summer, the schools I chose to work in, the biggest role was around, in all of those schools I went into, was first of all how we can have higher expectations and improve the behaviour of the young people in school, but also how the teachers and support staff within school made that reality. And that's always been. In fact, even though I retired from a full-time job, I've dropped back in retirement now to a part-time executive role in a trust where that very issue is there. It's live. It's the reason I've been asked to go back into the school to be able to manage that. And again, as I said, there back in the 80s or early 90s, behaviour has never been as bad. In the 2000s and the noughties, in the 2010s, 2020s, I hear exactly the same phrase: behaviour has never been as bad. That we have with there are always issues, as I see that. And there are always going to be those challenges. I do agree what's happened during the pandemic, with what Karl said. I'm hearing it everywhere at the moment in terms of how students have come back, faced the isolation and bereavement of friendship and time and everything else that they've faced within there, and the structure that school may have offered. Combine that with a burnt out workforce, under-resourced workforce, a very tired workforce, and we have a real dangerous cocktail at the moment in our schools. From my perspective, I think it always comes down to I'll be coming from a leadership in behaviour terms, and again, I've as you said before, I'm secondary, but I've also done a stint as leading what used to be called an EBD school, social emotional health of students, and a PRU. I did that for a year at a school that was in difficulty a few years ago. It's always been around two things for me. First one, establishing expectations, and the second one, establishing relationships. And if it's just expectations and a hard stick, without using the stick, but a hard line, without the relationships, it'll fall down. Likewise, I would say if it's about relationships without the structure that's needed, then things fall down. So for me, it's about a balance of high expectations and the real focus on relationships and really understanding the individual students and staff that we're working with. So I'll stop there for now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Patrick. Really insightful. And I'm now going to invite Tammy to share her thinking. Hi, Tammy.
Hi, I've unmuted, haven't I? Thank you, Alison, for having me, and I feel really privileged to be on this panel tonight. So yeah, thank you. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about how I've ended up in the role that I'm in now. Back in 2001, I really wanted to get back into work after having my second son, and I went to work for Connections, which I'm sure people remember Connections, who work with young people in schools and post-16, and yeah, I ended up doing a admin role, And one of the tasks of that role was being on the reception desk. And the minimal interaction I had with the young people really, really drew me into wanting to do more intensive work with those young people. So I developed my career. I trained as a personal advisor, working in schools with young people, delivering careers guidance, but also working with young people around those issues outside of school and careers. So things like drug and alcohol abuse, issues at home with their families, financial issues, all sorts of issues that our young people deal with. I then went on to do some specialist work with teen parents and pregnant teenagers. And that was working one-to-one with them through their difficulties, but I also ran some projects. And that was projects around re-engaging young mums to get back into education, to get their lives back on track, helping them with childcare, with discovering who they are and looking at what they want to achieve in their life. And I loved doing that work. So alongside doing my careers work, I was also doing that alongside my work. I then went on to become a team leader. And that was managing up to 12 members of staff who were working across schools, but working with neat young people, running centres. And yeah, that was challenging because you're dealing with so many different personalities and the challenges they have dealing with the young people. You're having to do a lot of supervision as well, because some of the work you do, it can be quite traumatic. You know, when you're working one-to-one and you're dealing with those issues, it can be really, really hard. And I always wanted to make sure that staff members didn't have to take that home, that they had someone at work they could talk to and you know, go through the issues that they'd had with that young person. I then joined Aspire, which was then called the Wickham Grange. And when I joined in 2013, it was one school. And today we have multiple sites. We have 5 sites, and we also run mental health services. We have the hospital school. We do outreach in mainstream schools. So I started off on maternity cover, actually, and then went on to become an assistant head and then head of school. And the head of school was an interesting role. I absolutely loved the role, but it is very, very challenging. And I agree with what Karl and Patrick have said. The behaviour has changed even within the time I've been working with young people. And one of the biggest challenges we're having at the moment is from COVID, because we have some students that are in Key Stage 3, so years 7, 8 and 9. And one of the trends we're noticing is that they haven't matured to the expected level that you would assume they'd be at. So you think they've had COVID, they've had possibly a year, maybe 2 years at home. And so they've missed out on that time being with their peers, learning in school, developing their communication skills, their maturity skills. They haven't had that. So we now have them in school. They have lost a chunk of how to communicate, how to develop their behaviour skills. And it's funny, the other day, when we had the snow day, you've got a group of 5 Key Stage 3 students, and I'm talking about 12, 13 year olds, and they're running around like you'd see in primary school, running around, playing, you know, throwing snowballs at each other. And it's interesting to see what impact that has had. And so then you've got the other issue of the cost of living crisis. So a lot of our families are struggling to provide for their children, and that has an impact on our young people. That's a lot for them to carry. You know, their parents, their families are struggling. They're taking on those emotions and those feelings. And then they come to school and they're trying to process everything that's going on. And just another thing I want to talk about is what we're seeing as well is we have different levels of behaviour challenges. We have different levels of need for our students. So we go from students of the age of 12 right up to 16. So you can imagine they all come with all their own different behaviour challenges. But not only that, some of them have SEN needs, they've got EHCPs, they've got undiagnosed SEN, which is one of the trickiest things. They have mental health issues, they have home issues, so many issues. And so you have to adapt your strategies and your behaviour management skills to support those young people of what they're going through. And so I find myself day to day, during the day, changing my style and changing the way I manage the behaviour to suit the emerging needs of those young people. So it is about being able to have a bag of strategies that you can use and differentiate how you support and manage the behaviours you're seeing. Because if you don't, you're not going to always get the results that you want. If you use the same strategy all the time, it's not going to work for all. You have to be able to adapt how you support their needs. And yeah, it's interesting. We're always growing and learning, and it's always important to think about how you can improve your skills and your style about, you know, reacting to the different needs of our young people. I could go on, but I'm going to stop there. But that's a bit of where I am and how I got there.
Thank you, Tammy, for sharing a very interesting story, a very different story. So to sort of now maybe just come up with some strategies and to think things through in a different kind of way. So it's coming up to the Christmas holidays. We sell the dream to the children that it's Christmas, they're going to be getting Christmas presents. There's a huge amount of commercialism around it. There's high expectations. There are images of happy ever after and people sitting around the table, eating extravagant meals and being carefree and happy. And they look warm, and we see the warm fires and all that kind of stuff. And the reality is a lot of children know that they're going to go home to a winter of disappointment. And I personally have always believed that behaviour is communication. So when children aren't self-regulating, when children are sad or angry or non-communicative or not following the rules for whatever reason, they're letting us know that they are unhappy about something. And I should imagine that the next few days in our schools are especially tough because the children know they're going to go home to disappointment. As adults, we're facing that. We all, you know, I can't wait for Christmas to be over personally, because it's just, there's so much hype, and I know that it's not going to be, it can't be the perfect image that everybody wants it to be. And then, of course, after Christmas, children are going to come back. Around the 20th of January is when the credit card bills are going to come out. That is the week in the year when we had the highest rate of domestic violence. And so we know that the children are witnessing that. So how do we get beside the children? You know, we've talked about being trauma informed, but when children let us know that things aren't okay, and most of the time children will not say this is what's going on at home because it's taboo, it's private, they feel ashamed, they think their friends have got stuff that they haven't got. We've got all of that scenario going on. How do we connect with those children so that they feel safe, so they feel like they can belong in the school, so that they feel so that we can give them hope, so that they can learn, so that they can be comfortable, so that education can become a priority for them again. And I suggest you take your mics off and just come in and share. Patrick, are you unmuting? Trying to? Tammy? Karl? Thoughts?
Actually,
Go for it.
all right, I'm unmuted. Thank you. It was struggling there. Christmas is an interesting one. I'll just pick any holiday for now anyway. I think in the build-up to any holiday, or when we come back from any holiday, we also see a spike in safeguarding concerns. That's the children who don't want to be at home for those extended periods, or when they've come back, the children who've been in a challenging circumstance at home. Now, we know that. So as in our schools, we should be planning to be able to deal and address that and make sure that the students know they've got the opportunity to speak before the holiday break, they've got the opportunity to speak after the holiday break. I think just that's just safeguarding rather than just about behaviour, but it does impact. And I think for me, whenever students, if you've created that culture of care within your school and the students know what to expect in that rhythm of the year as we come in through, some students will be super excited about Christmas and have wonderful experiences. And actually, we should be able to celebrate that cultural experience within our schools, but be sensitive and make sure that we can allow students to opt out or have an alternative provision during that particular period if we need to deal with exactly as you said there, the feelings that that may have. And I think we have as teachers quite often blind spots to that. If a member of staff loves Christmas, I heard staff talk about how they love Christmas and what they're going to do with their classes. That blinkered or blinded approach can create unhealthy situations for students. So I think we just need to be aware of those hidden areas for the students and make provisions. I do find, I'm going to talk well-being in general now and behaviour. Again, when I've worked in the PRUs, when I've worked with students, particularly with really tough backgrounds or it's really acting out the behaviour-wise, they've still wanted to show their acts of kindness, the random acts of kindness and so on as well. So Christmas, the 5 ways to well-being, the giving, the volunteering, the helping and supporting, I've found in the build up to Christmas, doing activities around charities and supporting others, or if not charities, how we're going to help others, allows for those conversations to be had and for people to have those conversations. I'm thinking particularly when I was in Liverpool, a group of students, and they were badly affected by knife crime, and we did some work with some of the community, putting food on for the community over Christmas so the old folks' homes and other community centres for drug rehabilitation and so on. The students that engaged with that are the students that some staff would say, oh, I'm surprised they're doing it. Well, actually allowing people to have an avenue to explore and feel safe. And in those situations, it's about those conversations again with the students to find out their own situation. Because again, one person's well-being dream is another person's well-being nightmare in terms of how we're feeling about ourselves.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. Tammy or Karl, did you want to say anything, or shall I raise another scenario? Tammy?
Yeah, I would just like to say that we do see a lot of challenges on the build up to Christmas. We've got one boy in particular who's said, they do nothing over Christmas. And it's sad, really, because, you do have staff members who are really excited about Christmas, but we have to be sensitive about how we are openly talking about what we're going to be up to and the things that we're doing. So, we are conscious that we're not talking or bragging or, getting excited too much, because there are students there who don't do anything. There are students there who the thought of being at home for 2 weeks, that just fills them with dread, having to be in that environment for many different reasons. And
I want just to ask, what about the children where they do celebrate Christmas and it is part of their culture and all those sorts of things, but they know it's going to be disappointing. They're bracing themselves for disappointment, and then their parents are going to be feeling inadequate because they can't give them the things that they want. And so you've got this really awful tension and toxicity
yes,
will be existing in those homes, and yet we're expecting the children to come into school and behave like there is no problem.
absolutely. And you see with some of our students, the behaviour really deteriorates. That
So
leads up.
What do you do with them?
So what we do is we try and be sensitive, and we try and give them time. So every one of my students at my site has a mentor. And so that mentor knows that student very well. They make the time to ensure that they know that student. And so it's finding a way to support that student without prying, because sometimes they don't want to talk about what's going on. They don't want to. They're fed up of talking to God knows how many people they've got to talk about. So it's about finding a way to let them know it's okay, to let them know that we're here for them, and to provide a distraction in a sense, you know, to find something at school that gives them a sense of enjoyment, because there's only so much we can do. They do have to go home, you know, and so they are going to go back into that environment. So we can make it special for them as much as possible in the way that we can to help them. So it might be having a really nice Christmas lunch. It might be doing a really fun art activity. It might be the PE teacher taking them to one of their favorite places like golf, or, you know, somewhere like that. And just giving them that time. You know, if they're saying, I don't want to go to, you know, effing maths or whatever, is saying, okay, why don't we go for a walk outside? Why don't we go for a walk up the road? So it's just being sensitive and kind, being kind and being thoughtful and thinking about, actually, they have got a lot going on. And so we have to be really supportive and kind to them at this time.
Yeah, thank you. Karl, do you want to say anything?
Yes. Am I unmuted? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Fantastic. Yes, just to echo both what Patrick and Tammy said, I think one of the things when I was doing my research, looking at the current generations that we're dealing with that are going through the school system. So it's Generation Z, which I believe is children born between 1997 to 2010. And then it's the new generation coming up, which are currently in primary, are Generation Alpha. And there's been a lot of research that's been done. And one of the things which is quite sad is that this is a very pessimistic generation. I think it was PwC did a research study on Generation Z, and only they asked them who are hopeful for the future, who are hopeful about, you know, the years ahead of you are going to be better than the years behind you. And remarkably, 88% of these young people said it's only going to get worse. They've lost faith in the political system. They've lost faith in, absolutely true. They've lost faith in the political system because of what's going on with the environment and climate change and everything that's happening, you know, in Europe. There's a real pessimism and a spirit of pessimism. And especially when you couple that with what Tammy and Patrick are both saying, really harsh socioeconomic conditions, it does seem like it's impossible. And I think that the only thing I'll add on to what both, or in fact, I'll just reiterate what you guys were saying is, as teachers, you must create an environment. You've got to try and put that hope back in those young people. And how you do that is not by saying, oh, Christmas is great or whatnot, but it's really leaning in and trying to understand what they're kind of going through, having those conversations, having those positive relationships. I always say to teachers, no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. It's always going to be Maslow before Bloom for me. Sorry, going into teacher language now. Maslow's hierarchy of needs versus Bloom's taxonomy. You could be Albert Einstein of science. You could be Cristiano Ronaldo of PE. But if somebody's lost their grandmother during COVID, the dad's lost their job, you know, the rent is going up, you can't expect that young person to be focused in your class and paying attention. And as Tammy was rightly saying, sometimes these kids don't want to reveal what they're going through. But it's really important to build that rapport, to have those conversations and build that relationship. And as Patrick was saying, not be a soft touch. Part of care is having boundaries as well and saying these are the boundaries. This is what's going to happen. But it's trying to create an environment where they do feel safe, they feel cared about, there are boundaries, and try and put that hope back in our young people, because it does look bleak. If you look at the news, I don't even watch the news anymore. It's just, oh my gosh, it's like a horror film, right? It's about creating those environments that they can come to school and at least feel like, all right, if I'm getting crap at home, at least I'm going to be in a place where there is a responsible adult that will model the right responses to things, that will encourage me, that where I'll have a meal and I'll feel warm, and at least they've got that. So, you know, there's many different ways, but I know I'm conscious of time.
Okay. I can remember having a scenario in one of my schools when I was leading, where we had a pupil who had gone through her infant years as a model child, really gregarious, outgoing, popular, absolutely wonderful. Actually came with very little English, quickly learnt English, integrated, and was a popular pupil. And then when she got to around year 4, she started getting herself into trouble and her behaviour escalated, deliberately hurting children, deliberately hurting, breaking staff, working hard to be excluded. And I hung in there. We spent quite a lot of time together. Now, I knew that there was a scenario going on. Absolutely knew there was something going on. And then her behaviour then escalated into becoming a school refuser. And I can remember her mum coming to school with her and sobbing at the door, saying, I want her to be in school. I can't afford the fine. The child then being hysterical about, not wanting to be in school, making herself sick. Mum being in tears, having to take a child up to class and all that kind of stuff, even staying with her there. And she'd be okay as long as her mum stayed with her. But then as soon as her mum went, she'd become really violent, extremely violent. And then got to a point where she was playing angels and, wanting to throw herself down the stairwell and all of that kind of stuff. So we're talking about extreme behaviours. And I think everybody has one or two children in their school with extreme behaviours. What I discovered in a time when we went and had a walk and had an ice cream was that her mum was being forced to make pornographic films. They were violent pornographic films. And she knew that while she was at school, her mum was being subjected to all kinds of violence and humiliation. And she thought it was her job to be at home to protect her mum. And it would have been easy for me to have thrown her out because there was enough. So I've never been passionate around zero tolerance. And it's stories like that which formed my opinion. It's not me being woke or unthinking or uncaring about the rest of the community or anything else. And yes, I made sure the whole staff understood that there was something going on. Nobody needed to know all of the details. That was a story. It's a real story. And there's a story like that in every single school. So can you guys come in and maybe talk about zero tolerance and approaches that we may take? With that particular child, she spent an awful lot of time with me, which is probably why she chose to disclose, and it was also, she chose to disclose when we were off-site rather than on-site, which I always think is really interesting. So share your thinking, because people want to know, we've got two camps, zero tolerance, not, we're stopping the others from learning. We've got targets to meet and all of those sorts of things. Yes, teachers are under pressure, but you've always got scenarios like that. So please unmic and share.
Do you want me to kick off again?
Sure.
Okay, the story you shared there, well, before I come to that, I'll share one or two of the similar things briefly, but the zero tolerance is one of those things that we're good at doing this in education. The word satisfactory used to be okay, it's now a dirty word. Mm-hmm. The word capability used to be just talking about how capable people are. It now normally means get your coat, you're off. So we do this in education sometimes. And I'll come back to the phrase that equates in some schools to zero tolerance, this thing of high expectations, no excuses, no exceptions, which becomes how we operate. I think on its own is toxic. I think if you take the things that that Tammy's spoken about, that Karl's spoken about, that I've seen, I think Sundip in the chat has mentioned as well, about the relationships that go with it, we just don't know what's going on in people's lives, adults or children, or actually we sometimes do. So I remember being the head of a school in Salford once, and the children were wearing shoes to school, and if they came in trainers, they were in trouble. I had one head of year really inappropriately laying into a student that come to school in trainers, and it turned out it was a year 7 boy, lovely little lad. No, but he didn't have any defence for what, and then kicked off massively when he was challenged. And his older brother, the police had raided their house and confiscated all size 4 shoes or whatever else for a crime. So everyone's shoes were taken to rule them in or out of a crime. So he had no shoes to wear. And he came to school. I've got one of the schools in Liverpool. In the first 18 months there, I had 5 dads, uncles or cousins who died as a result of knife crime. In another school, I had somebody kneecapped inside my front entrance on an evening before, and we had quite a really high-profile murder case of somebody's brother was executed on the doorstep. Those things happen, and I mean, I'm using some extremes again, but in every school, in every year, probably even every week, there are these cases that occur for students, and I think having every student in crisis has a key adult who works with them and gets to know them about those relationships. In a school where there are 1,500 children, say a secondary school, you have form tutors, but actually you know the students are in crisis. And if anybody's behaviour changes as significantly as the young girl you spoke about, that should be a trigger to what do we need to do? How can we support this child more? And we can be proactive when we know we've got students who are acting out, the behaviour isn't right, getting to understand them, and for a trusted adult or more to be able to build that relationship. Because I think high expectations, no excuses, no exceptions. If we take that out of the high expectation that we will create a culture of care in our school and that every child will have a trusted adult, if we have no exception to that, doesn't matter. Sometimes children make it hard for you to love them, okay? But that exception there, there's no it's not we believe in inclusion, but not him because his behaviour is out of control, not him because of whatever else. When the children are acting out more, we should kill with kindness in terms of put that attention and sort of no exceptions to that, and don't make excuses. The fact we've not got enough money in school, I'd prefer to meet the needs of an individual child in crisis than have a wonderful math lesson. If I need to take somebody off to go and we deal with those things. Now, leaders are having to make some horrible choices in school, and in particular support staff. Class sizes are increasing because teachers are going. Support staff, we have real issues in recruitment and retention of support staff, the online learning and everything else, and working from home. Rather than earning peanuts in a school, you can go and work peanuts, but work from home now. Whereas before, people who want to come and work in schools for the school hours, the home working can allow. So we've got some real challenges in school, but we shouldn't make excuses about that. We have a duty of care, and safeguarding is paramount. And our behaviour is, I think, the extremes we're talking about fall under that category for me. So again, I am a merchant of hope, very much like Karl. I will push, and I am really hopeful for the future. I think it's on us to be creative, to improvise, to adapt, to overcome, to find the ways forward for young people. And the situation you said there is that if a child is hurting, we should all, even if we don't know the context, enough from a leader to be able to say there's a situation here, it will be dealt with, and actually not want somebody executing, which is quite often what I hear in schools. A member of staff wants a pound of flesh because a child has done something, not bought a book, homeworking, etc. So I'll stop there. I've started to rant a bit, Alison.
No, you haven't ranted at all, and I need to say thank you. But I want to say thank you for saying what you're saying. And then some people there sort of saying, but what about everybody else and all those sorts of things. And obviously it was my job to make sure that everyone was okay, that the adults felt okay and all of those sorts of things. But let's look at the other side of it. If I had just let her go, I would have been placing her in a situation where maybe she could have become a victim herself, where she could have been forced into making porn films and all of those sorts of things. I know for a fact that she isn't now. She's old, she's an adult. She didn't go down that route. But if she wasn't in school, if we weren't safeguarding her in that kind of way, if she was at home with her mum, I don't think what I know of the scenario, I think those films would have gone on being made with her there. And that would have exposed her to a whole other side, ugly side of life, and she might even have been forced to do things. So I'm not saying that her story is perfect, but at least I personally feel that by us finding a way to hold her and to include her, and I have to say that once I found the story out, we then were able to contract in a different kind of way, and she began to understand the importance of regulation, self-regulation, because children need to understand it's their job to manage themselves. It's not adults' jobs. But I do understand that children make themselves unlovable. And when they make themselves unlovable, it's because they want to prove that adults hate them. They want to prove that they are unlovable. That's their big mission. It's not to do anything else. And so I'd like us to come to the closing conversation that I thought would be really great, is that when you've got children who are wanting to prove that they are unlovable, and they take it out on you as an adult, you as the teacher, you as the TA, you as the head teacher, And they're going to push all of your buttons, and they're going to insult you, and they're going to hurt you, and they're going to be uncooperative towards you, and they're going to make you feel like rubbish. How do we manage our own personal well-being? Because it does hurt. I'd be lying if I say that you don't personalize children's behavior sometimes, no matter how professional, no matter how experienced you are. But how do you manage your own well-being so that when children who feel that they are unlovable want you to show them that they're unlovable, how do you take care of yourself? Karl?
I'll go first. This is such an interesting question, and I'm first of all, I just want to say I'm sorry to hear about that young person, and I've had very similar experiences. What I say to people, and this is something I had to learn, the thing with teaching is, I honestly believe teaching is a vocation. None of us have made millions of pounds unless you work for the government, or this particular government of education.
Oh.
So you know, it's not about the money. But the thing that I've learned, and I'm saying I'm still learning this as an educator, is the thing with teaching is the more you can give, the more you give, the more you give, the more it takes from you. And I'm learning this. And one thing I've noticed with teachers, and I think it's the same with most people who work in public services, like the nurses, and what we're seeing, and this is quite a topical conversation because we're seeing, you know, I'm hearing stories about nurses, you know, saving people's lives and going to food banks because they can't afford off their wages, you know, to do what they do. You know, this is something which is quite endemic, unfortunately, in this particular climate. But what I would say is, I think part of the reason why a lot of teachers, as I said, 40% of teachers are looking to leave within 5 years of training, is we're not good at looking after ourselves and saying when enough is enough and putting limits in. When I was a team leader, before I became a full-time consultant, I was the alternative provision lead in my particular school. So I was basically running the pupil referral unit within the school rather than outsourcing to external providers because we just felt the quality wasn't great. And I remember saying to my staff or the people that are working in the team, is like, if there was a serious incident, it would be basically, it's time owed, you know, just get yourself home or whatnot, because it is a hard job. And what I would say is that one of the things that have kept me going is this thing in psychology called projection. Okay. And part of my role over the years, I've done a lot of psychological training. And all projection is really simply is people will pour out. So it's hard to even explain on the spot, but projection is if people will pour out their emotions onto you, it's not you, the person they're trying to get at, it's whoever's haunting them. So for example, if I had a lad who unfortunately had a very violent father, very, very violent father. And we knew this, and it was a CP, we went through all of this. So he had a real issue with men. So when men said a certain tone to him, it's almost like, you see, it's like a flag to a bull. And he would just go off. And, you know, members of staff were like, you know, how dare him? And, you know, in the staff room, you have your moan and you have your complaint, but you'll complain about it. But what I tried to say to my team members was, it's not you, John or Darren. He's seeing his dad. When you use that tone, something's triggering in his brain, which takes him back to his house. And it takes him back to his father. And the reason why he's doing it to you is because he knows that you can take it. If he does that to his dad, he's going to get knocked around. So we are just like the lightning rod, which is capturing it. Now, it's not to excuse his behavior. And of course, we did a lot of work around triggers. But again, that's a whole other story, but I know time is going. You know, understanding what the triggers were. So, for example, it's talking in certain tones, making rewards and sanctions very clear, spelling out everything. But what I said to those teachers was that you've got to take yourself out of that equation and make sure that you are looking after yourself. You're eating properly, you're sleeping properly, and talking as well. Don't try and take it all on. And I see a lot of teachers, especially ECTs, do this. It's like they feel that they have to know everything, and they have to, early career teachers, you know, they have to know everything and do everything. I'm like, speak out. That's why you have mentors. That's why you have managers. You know, I know you feel that you're on probation or whatnot, but what I'd say is, you know, stuff the job. If your mental health, and I've seen this so many times, where teachers have had breakdowns, you know, they can barely, you know, I've had one of my, anyway, that's another story. But a team member, basically, every time she left work, she was weeping in the car, she wasn't eating, all these types of things. You know, it's not worth it. No job is worth it, right? It's not worth it. So I'd rather you look after yourself and make sure that you are okay rather than having breakdowns. And sometimes you've got to say when enough is enough. And even myself, I have to say that to myself, where I say, I can't take this on, or I can't do this, or can I pass it on to somebody else? So I think that we have to be, especially with teachers, we have to learn to be a bit more selfish and start putting boundaries in. Otherwise, as I always say, you're no good to anybody else if you're in pieces. How can you model being, regulate? How can you model emotional regulation when you're emotionally dysregulated? It doesn't make sense. I'd rather you go home. I'd rather you, as I said to my team, go home, we sort out time mode or whatnot, have a rest, and we come back tomorrow, rather than you just stay here and suffer. So that's my kind of thinking on it.
I like that. I love that a lot. Thank you so much, Karl. That was proper wisdom. Okay.
Can I go next?
Yes, please come in.
I'd like to start off by, doing a shout out to support staff, especially those that are the behaviour support team, learning support team, because they are the ones that are dealing with a lot of those, abuse and challenging behaviours day after day after day, and they really are the punching bag. So I shout out to my learner support, but support staff across all educational settings, because it's not an easy role that they do. For me, I agree with what Patrick and Karl have said. It's really important to ensure that you are doing something to look after your well-being, but not everybody knows how to do that. And so one of the things that we do at my school is at the end of every day we do a debrief, and that is where we talk about the issues of the day, the challenges of the day, and we talk about what's happened. And it's a way that everyone can come together and offload the day, talk about what's happened, and it's often ends with us all laughing about the situation. So even though someone might be really upset, when we talk about it and go through it, and another staff member might remind them, actually, it's not you, it's them. They've got A, B, and C going on. And it helps people to feel that they've been able to offload that issue, offload that feeling of, just want to give up, I'm fed up, and be able to go home and just switch off. So that's really important to me. I also think it's important that we look after each other. So you touch base with your staff members. I have to say, I've got a really strong team where I work, and I know that they check in on each other, but I always try and make an effort to touch base with them, especially when it's been a particularly hard day. A text doesn't take a lot, If you want to talk, give me a call. So I always try and make sure that they know, and I remind them there's always someone that you can talk to. I'm here, and just support. And then for me, I just come home and rant and rave at whoever's here that wants to listen to me. But I've got some very good girlfriends, and I'm part of a talking circle group as well, that is very supportive. So yeah, it's and also another thing, is when I know I've had a really tough week, or I've had a really tough time, I try and make sure that I plan something for the weekend. I have something to look forward to. That it just kind of helps me to keep going, to know that I've got that to look forward to. So yeah, just some thoughts there.
The other thing that I did regularly was, if I knew that someone had an especially difficult class, it was making sure that we couldn't afford coaching for everybody. But if I had to prioritize who got coaching, then it would be that person. Okay. Patrick, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just quickly on that. I think some of the things that have been talked about, particularly for the people who are working with the most challenging, so within a PRU or special setting, that may be, or the full team. In a mainstream school, it may be the people who work on the edge with those students. Regular support and supervision. I can't, from qualified supervisors, external supervisors, to really allow that to occur. There's a real strength also in coaching, and Andrew Burton dropped into. Andrew's a very talented leader in Greater Manchester that I've been doing some coaching with. CPD and one of the things he raised about getting people to understand those things. I think that's really important as well, making sure the adults in the best possible way to look after themselves. And in fact, I suppose my bread and butter of the things I do now, really, I support a lot of heads and other senior leaders, CEOs and so on, in actually looking after themselves. You'd expect people to know it, but it is really probably the number one issue. We're a caring profession. We care for others, and actually self-care quite often gets put behind. So I would actually say this idea of self-care is not selfish. And the phrase I use whenever I go into a school is I'll talk about the first thing every member of staff should do is look after yourself first before we help others, so we're making the biggest difference for the children. If you like the oxygen mask analogy, it's counterintuitive to us who want to care for everybody, but if we're in the best possible shape, proactively or reactively making sure we get that support, we're then in a best position to support the people that work around us and do that, so we can make the biggest difference for the children. So I suppose that is that side, and again, predicated for me, I know I've banged on about it, this idea of a culture of care, and really kindness is central to there, and not forget what you said there, not forgetting self-kindness.
Yeah. And then we've, this has just been absolutely amazing. People have talked about building trusting relationships and remembering how important that is. And then the difficulty in getting the right staff to understand and appreciate that children are projecting. So it will feel really personal, but children are simply letting us know they're hurt. And if we can hold on to that, it doesn't take away the seriousness of what's going on, but it frames it for us really well. People like Karl's idea around the supervision and the end of the day, and Tammy also being available for her staff, and just helping each other. And then compassion fatigue is exhausting, and we all need self-care always. Teachers are really bad at taking care of themselves, and a lot of teachers are single, so often going home and maybe not having anyone to offload on. Or just share concerns, and so that's why maybe schools need to remember that compassion towards the pupils needs to be extended to towards each other as well. So we have gone over time by a whole lot, but I have to say it's been an amazing discussion, and thank you so much everyone for joining us. I'm going to ask Tammy and then Patrick and Karl to conclude. Just closing thoughts, and if you can keep it brief, it'd be really great. So Tammy, would you like to go first?
So thank you, Alison. It has been a really great panel talk today. My closing thoughts are that the whole thing around well-being is crucial, because what we're dealing with in terms of students and their challenging behaviour is a lot. It's a lot, and I think sometimes in society, those of us who work in education are often forgotten, and the amount of time and support and love that we give to young people of the whole country is crucial. And it's important that we treat each student as an individual, try and understand, learn and appreciate how we can support them to be the best version of themselves. But equally, we have to make sure that we are doing right by ourselves, so that we have got everything within us to be able to give them the best support to help them on their way to become, the best adults they can in this challenging world that we live in.
Thank you, Tammy. Karl?
Three things super quickly. Number one, treat yourself like your own best friend. Simple phrase, but it's something that I'm really, for the last 2 years, I've been doing that. Sometimes we're the biggest enemies to ourselves. So treat yourself like your own best friend. Number two, no one will care how much you know until they know how much you care. Eleanor Roosevelt said that, but it's absolutely true. Build that relationship, and then the grades will come after. All right. Somebody once said, kids spell love T-I-M-E. I love that. I always think about that with my daughter. Kids spell love T-I-M-E. So spend that time. Number three, please go and buy this Action Era Teacher 2 on Amazon. Come on, I had to plug it. I'm
Bring it into focus, Karl. Bring it into focus.
I know. I'm an East London. I had to flog it. I felt like Del Boy there. You know what I mean? But yeah, thank you very much. I loved it, and it's an absolute honor. You guys, I've been following you for a while, so to be on a panel with you guys, thank you.
Thank you. You've all been absolutely spectacular. And I'm just still thinking about the information that Karl shared in terms of the fact that we've got children who don't feel they're feeling very negative about what life has to offer them. And I think that in order for children to understand the importance of self-regulation, they need to know why self-regulation is important. And that means they need to know where they're going. And I often share the story of how we used to get the children to do a timeline of where they wanted to be as adults. You know, what was their dream? And we did that from the youngest age. And then they needed to say where they would be when they were 11, where they'd be when they were 16, where they'd be at 18, and all of those sorts of things. And then in order for them to make their own dream come true, they needed to understand what they needed to focus on in their studies and all of those sorts of things. But that's where behavior regulation became important. So, for example, if a child talks about wanting to be a pro footballer, no football club wants someone who's going to get them a load of red cards. And so you need to be able to self-regulate if you want to be a pro footballer, you know, and no one is going to want to employ someone who's constantly late or isn't, I'm not particularly, you know, I'm not going to go into zero tolerance around hair and uniform, all of those sorts of things, but I do think it's important to come to school tidy. And so children need to understand how that might look to an employer, or if they're going to become an entrepreneur, then they need to be self-disciplined in order to be successful as an entrepreneur. So when you frame it, when you give children hope about if you get children to start thinking about their own big picture and how they're going to get there, and they realize that their behavior, their self-regulation is as important as the grades they're going to get, then that gives them something that they begin to be part of, rather than having something done to them. So it's always about making their own dreams come true. So I hope that helps a little bit. You will find Karl and Patrick and Tammy and I all on Twitter. Above and Beyond is also on Twitter, but we're also going to have this kind of conversation on the Above and Beyond education app. So come and join us, share your thoughts, ask for help, support each other. If you're having a tough time, reach out and tell us so that we can help you. You don't have to be alone. But thank you very, very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.